Hello, everyone. Welcome and peace be with you today. Let me just get my microphone. There we go. Today is Tuesday, July 29th, 2025, and we have a poem today. Often, when I choose these poems, sometimes they're ones that I have in mind that made an impression on me a long time ago, and I wanted to revisit them and take the opportunity to read them again and reflect on them. Others simply strike me kind of the morning of. I will look through some of my collections of poetry and a certain one will reach out or call out to me. And that's what happened this morning. I was flipping through this English Victorian poetry and anthology, Dover Thrift Edition, edited by Paul Negri. And the first poet that's included in here is Alfred Lord Tennyson, who I've heard a lot about, but honestly, I don't know if I could have told you very many of his poems off the top of my head. The first one that's included in this edition here, and there are many of his poems lasting several pages. They have choruses, they have multiple cantos or multiple parts in them. Just glancing through, I see poems entitled "The Lotus Eaters," "Ulysses." So it seems like he has a strong influence pulling from classical literature as his influence. But the first one that's included is simply 15 lines, and it's called "The Kraken." And just to say something personal about my own fascinations right now, I am fascinated by the ocean and sea creatures. Um, whether it be tiny fish or whether it be, enormous whales that dwell in the deep. In fact, kind of the bigger and more monstrous looking, the more I'm fascinated by them. My favorite book is Moby Dick. I count whales as my second favorite animal after dogs. And so this idea of this mysterious sea creature, the Kraken, caught my eye. And so I read the poem a couple times this morning and really wanted to share it. So this poem was included in a volume that Tennyson published in 1830, and that would have made him about 21 years old when this poem is published. This is The Kraken by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Below the thunders of the upper deep, far, far beneath in the abysmal sea, his ancient, dreamless, uninvaded sleep, the Kraken sleepeth. Faintest sunlights flee about his shadowy sides. Above him swell huge sponges of millennial growth and height, and far away into the sickly light, from many a wondrous grot and secret cell, unnumbered and enormous polypi winnow with giant arms the slumbering green. There hath he lain for ages, and will lie, battening upon huge sea worms in his sleep, until the latter fire shall heat the deep. Then, once by man and angels to be seen, in roaring he shall rise, and on the surface die. Okay, so there's a lot of cool and strange things about this poem. First, it is considered a sonnet. I thought right away, looking at the length of it, it might be a sonnet, and then I counted 15 lines and thought, oh no, it's something else. But a brief search around the internet, scholars do consider it to be a sonnet, despite it being irregular in form, adding a 15th line and extending the sestet there. So that also throws off the rhyme scheme. Otherwise, the Kraken is considered to be a Petrarchan sonnet. I'm also struck that, as we've talked about with sonnets previously, there's not really much of a movement in terms of the question and answer or the setup and the solution between the octet and the sestet. Um, in fact, if there's any sort of movement in the poem, it seems to be within the last three lines, where the speaker foresees the latter fire heating the deep and then the Kraken rising and dying on the surface. And these last three lines drew my attention a lot because puzzled by why he's dying. The Kraken is dying immediately on the surface. Um, the Kraken is, I believe, Scandinavian in origin, in myth, and all the representations that I've seen of it, whether in art or whether in movies like Pirates of the Caribbean, or I think there was one called something with the Titans with Liam Neeson, where in the advertising for it, he would frequently, it was paused, say, "Release the Kraken," right? It was this really terrifying, enormous figure of destruction that had no trouble, it seemed, surviving on the surface. So that this Kraken dies immediately on the surface kind of pulls the rug out from underneath the reader, I think. The first 12 to 13 lines are filled with these ominous and dark and mysterious descriptions. Um, you know, deep into the ocean, far deep, far beneath. The sea down there is abysmal. Um, and abysmal there, I think, not in the way we use the adjective now to mean kind of dreadful or extra bad, intolerable, but here literally being abyss like. That there's almost, it's so dark and so vast that there's almost a nothingness that he's dwelling in and emerging from. Um, and it talks just about the faintest sunlights being able to make it down there. Other creatures mostly keeping away from him, other than tiny things like secret cells and sponges. Um, it talks about millennia of growth around him. So he's been asleep for thousands and thousands of years. His sleep pays no mind to the destruction that it places on like the sea worms below it. So it also gives this idea that he's destructive and intimidating towards other elements of nature as well, not just something that would terrify humans. Um, and then at the end, we have him waking, and the latter fire that is waking him is interesting to me because I wonder if it's a dormant volcano under the sea that's erupting. Now it's hard not to think of it, although I doubt this is Tennyson's intention. It's hard not to think of it as a sort of warming of the oceans or some sort of climate event that's happening there. It also sounds a bit hellish, which is interesting because as I'm reading the rest of the sonnet, I don't get images of hell. And this makes me wonder if Tennyson was not somewhat influenced by Milton's Paradise Lost, which briefly references the appearance of the Leviathan on Judgment Day. And the Leviathan in the Bible is referenced by God when he is basically telling Job, "How dare you challenge me and ask for answers about why I do what I do? Where were you when I created the behemoth and the Leviathan," which are understood to be these mysterious, giant, unfathomable creatures that also represent a sort of chaos. So I'm wondering if in Tennyson's poem, he's rising there from a sort of hell and is hell bent on destruction, being seen only by man and by angels. And the fact that we include angels in there suggests to me that there's like a judgment day occurrence happening at the end of the poem. Then he roars to the surface and on the surface dies. Now, because of this ending, there are critics and scholars who suggest that the Kraken is actually the poet with writer's block, the poet in some sort of creative crisis, the poet unable to express oneself. Others have read it as kind of being about a class warfare, that there's a sleeping giant, which is the working class, that's going to be awoken from their slumber and is going to force this kind of Marxist moment of reckoning with the bourgeoisie. In both of those cases, that Kraken still ends up dying, so I'm not sure how liberating either of those readings are in particular. But what I think is fascinating about those readings, whether you want to try them on or not, is that it underscores the way in which the Kraken, as a form of Leviathan, like the Leviathan does, embodies this symbol so vast that so many different social and ideological interpretations can be cast upon it. It's a very, very rich symbol, much like the whale is in Moby Dick. And I think that's part of what is alluring and fascinating about it, is that it's something that is hard to pin down and contain within the human mind. It's an object of fascination, but not one that's easily understood. Um, and yeah, so I don't know. I thought it was a fun poem and a fun thing to think about this morning, to dwell on giant sea creatures of the deep. And hopefully you enjoyed the poem as much as I did. Have a lovely rest of your day, and thank you for joining us.